Hello, this is Pastor Scott Conway with Quest Xian. The how-to real answers explain it all. Maybe it doesn't mean what they say. God trusting, Bible believing, saved by Jesus church. And we've been talking about our bump, and that's our bump. And we've been talking about sex a couple of times ago. And we are talking about divorce. We covered a ton of scripture last time. We went over it very quickly because this is part of a 12 lesson set. And if I'm abbreviating it into just one lesson and kind of expanding into the deal principle a bit, I'm not going to cover 20 hours of material in 1 hour. But this time I want to talk about some of the practicalities. And so we talked about the idea last time that there has always been for-cause divorce. That if you go all the way back to the case law in Exodus, this for-cause divorce has always existed. And when you deal with the times of Jesus, the Hillelite and Shammite debate was not debating for-cause divorce. They were only debating any cause divorce, which was a Hillelite, maybe I'll call it a contrivance. But what do we do with the causes, no matter what the causes are? So suppose, for instance, you have a church, and in your church, you believe that there is divorce for adultery only, and that's the only cause for divorce. How do we do that? So suppose, for instance, you have a husband and wife situation, and because 70% of the time when divorces are filed, it's the wife doing it, let's just assume it's the wife who wants the divorce. And the wife sits down in your office as a pastor and says, I think my husband's having an affair. I want a divorce. Well, is that enough? Is her suspicion enough to allow her to have a divorce over an affair? Or do you need confirmation? So what if you talk to him and he admits it? Okay, well, then there's an affair and you can say, okay, well, and under the circumstance, divorce is okay. But what if he says, I'm not having an affair. Who would I be having an affair with? I have no time to be having an affair, even if I wanted to have an affair. I get up, I go to work, I leave work, I come home. I don't know where she gets some of these ideas. I understand she's suspicious, but I'm not having an affair. Now, we're not having sex, but I'm not having sex with somebody else either. All I seem like I do in my life is I work and I go home, I relax in front of the television, go to bed, wake up, do it again. That's my life. Well, now what do you do? Now, suppose as a counseling pastor, you sit down with the woman and says, okay, well, you have talked with your husband. He says he's not having an affair. And she says, well, I'm sure he is because we're not having sex and you know how men are and men just can't go without it. So I know he must be having an affair somewhere. Okay, do you authorize the divorce? So if it's divorce for adultery only, and what you have is her suspicion and her only evidence is she knows she's not doing it with her husband. So therefore, logically, he must be doing it with somebody else because he's certainly not going without it. She's just sure of it. Do you authorize the divorce? Do you say the divorce is okay and the remarriage is okay because divorce was for the cause of adultery? And this kind of speaks to the overall problem, no matter what your approved causes are for divorce, is what evidence do we think we need? What do we do if someone sits in our office and they say they want a divorce? And we've told them, well, divorce is only for this cause. The practical problem we have is how sure do we have to be? Now, even in my system of for-cause divorce, of a violation of the marriage vows or a violation of whatever the deal might be, if someone sits down and says, well, I believe that my husband is violating love, or I believe my husband is violating honor, or he's not cherishing me, or the having or the holding, or some element of the vows isn't being met, am I a finder of fact? Am I a judge? Am I a jury? Does she have to prove her case? Does he have to prove his case? Is there a prosecution and a defense? Is someone the plaintiff that has to show with evidence that this is the case? Now, if we go by Old Testament law, are there two witnesses? There was a story in a Shammite court And we talked about the Hillelite any cause divorce, where just someone just has to state a cause and that's considered automatically adequate. But with the Shammaites, you had to have a specific cause. And there was one particular case where the specific cause was adultery, that the husband said he came home. And when he came home from his travels, he found his wife in bed with another man. He caught them in the very act. But there's a problem. She denied it. The man denied it. There was one witness, the husband. There wasn't a second witness that would testify to the facts. And the divorce was not granted, even though he insisted that he saw them with his own eyes, because of the legal requirement that there must be two witnesses. So there had to be two witnesses to the adultery. He had to prove it by the accounts of two people, and he was only one person. And if the others denied it, he couldn't prove his case based upon the legal standard of the Shammai courts. Well, what do we do today? And this is one of the big problems we run into, whether you're divorced for adultery and abandonment by a non-believer only, and that's the only causes that you believe. What's the evidence? Are we going to be finders of fact? Are we going to take in evidence? Are we going to say, okay, well, you have to prove to us to our satisfaction that this is true? Or there has to be an admission, or. And you see the problem we run into. Now, when you're doing a for-cause divorce, we have the same problem. And this is part of why in law, because if you recall, I'm also a lawyer in California, prior to the 80s, we changed the law in the 80s, you had to establish cause in court. Well, then here gets to be the problem, because the division of property and support and all sorts of stuff hinged on who was at fault for the divorce. There was war in the courts. There's accusations that would fly. Now, part of the problem, same problem in court, but it's worse, is there's a burden of proof in court. And if both sides are slinging accusations and everything's a he said, she said, what do you do? Well, then here's the other problem we ran into in the California courts, is couples would go to war in divorce court. They would battle it out, sometimes over the stupidest things, because the system put them in an adversarial proceeding. And the system made that adversarial proceeding a high stakes gambit, that your money was at stake, your property was at stake, your custody was at stake, your future income was at stake. With so much at stake, based upon whose story was believed, you can just imagine how bad some of these wars got. That if you've ever seen a divorce even today, when you can just file for irreconcilable differences and both of you go your own way and everything is presumptively even, and you still see how vile and toxic and cruel some divorces can be, you can imagine if you back up 35, 40 years when we made a husband and a wife go to war in court. And then when it's all done and the dust settles, then we say, and now co-parent your kids together. So pause right there for a second. Co-parent your kids together. Be partners in raising your kids. We just made you go to war with each other for months, maybe years. And now that we've picked our winners and our losers and we've made our finding, now just go be friendly with each other and cooperate for the raising of your children. Well, that almost never worked. And we made that mess by making them go to war with each other. And so the state of California, along with several other states, decided, you know, we're going to do away with this combative legal warfare that we're throwing these couples into, because we kind of want them to be able to get along for the sake of the children. And maybe getting along a little bit more even during the process will help, because we're the ones who made it so high stakes that we put the children on the firing line. We made the children the most powerful weapon to use against the opposing party. We did that. And so the state of California, along with several other states, decided, you know what? This is bad enough as it is. And the kids are in the middle enough as it is. The kids get wielded as weapons and are in the crossfire bad enough as it is, just from one or the other parent being toxic. We should not be forcing the issue and making it happen even more. So that's what the courts decided. That was the legal system got changed. But what do we do in the church? Do we need proof? If someone comes to me and they want a divorce, what evidence do I need? Now, when I'm counseling someone, I don't need any evidence when I'm counseling someone. I can just take them at their word, because what I'm doing is I'm helping them deal with their perception of the situation, which may line up perfectly with the facts. It may be misaligned with the facts. It may be a flat out misperception. It doesn't really matter, because all I'm doing is helping this one individual. But as soon as there's consequences to somebody else, now there's a problem. And what are we going to do? So at Quest Xian, our solution is we leave it up to the couple. That we leave it up to the individuals in the couple and the couple themselves to make the call themselves. What do they believe is adequate cause? What do they believe is adequate evidence? Now, we may have the conversation with them about, well, how do you know? What is it you know? What do you feel, and how sure are you? And what are the underlying facts? And we'll have the conversations, but we're not adjudicating the case. Because whether we're dealing with a divorce issue or any other issue, I'm not a trial judge. I'm not holding court. I'm not doing plaintiff and defense. That I'm counseling a couple. Now, in that entire mix, here are a few things I do strongly suggest to everybody I counsel. You do not get divorced over emotion. You do not get divorced over a feeling. Now, fortunately, one of the advantages we have is as part of my material, I have a book on emotional intelligence that defines emotion as a language. So anger, for instance, means that there's a broken rule. Fear means something's coming, I'm not ready. Hurt means that I'm being damaged. And so you have all of these meanings connected to emotion. So we can dig behind them and understand. So say, for instance, if I'm talking to a wife and she feels unfulfilled, and that her and her husband are fighting and she's angry a lot. Okay, well, being angry a lot and being unfulfilled and fighting, to me, doesn't sound like you're done taking a look at it. Because one of the things that happens a lot is if you're fighting and you're angry, well, that means that you have a difference. And if you're not having discussions, that means that you're having an emotionally intense difference, and it's being expressed with some intensity. And if you're angry, that means that you have some sort of a must or must not rule that is being broken. Now, in particular, dealing with fighting and anger, there was a curious story that I heard, and I know I've shared about the woman who murdered her husband. I'm not talking about that one, but there was the ground beef story. Now, this particular wife, when she would buy ground beef, she would buy very lean ground beef. And one day, among all the other things that she might periodically ask her husband to do, on his shopping list was ground beef. Can you pick up some ground beef on your way home? So he stopped off and he picked up some ground beef. Now, I don't remember the exact percentages, but there's like 88% lean, which means it's 12% fat. And there's 90-something% lean, which means it's only like 5 or 6% fat. And she wanted the really lean. And he showed up with the less expensive one. And she just flew off the handle and laid into him. And she was raging and yelling and screaming. And he was standing there and saying, I don't understand what this is about. And as she was screaming at him, like, you got the wrong beef. You're supposed to get whatever it was, 95% lean, and you got 88% lean. And what the heck's wrong with you? And on and on. And he says, oh, Well, I thought it might have been something important. And he walked out the room. And her first reflex is, how can you not think this is important? And then she caught herself and she realized, I am screaming at the top of my lungs over how lean the ground beef is when I didn't tell him to pick up the lean ground beef. I just told him to get ground beef. He did what I asked him to do. He just didn't do what I had in my head. And so he did it not exactly the way I wish he had. And I am screaming at the top of my lungs, what's wrong with me? Instead of what's wrong with him. Now, this was one of those cases where she was a housewife, a stay-at-home mom. She stayed home and took care of the kids. He supported the household. And it struck her that he was a good man doing good work, taking care of the family, and that he did exactly what she asked him to do. He just didn't do it the way she would have, and she's treating him like he's evil by how badly she's attacking him. And for her, that was a turning point. She would forevermore refer to that as the hamburger incident or the ground beef incident. And that was her moment of realization when she realized her anger and their fighting was most of the time her being ridiculous. Because if someone did that to her, if someone yelled and screamed and was punitive to her when she did exactly as she was asked, it's just that they had some extra information in their head that they didn't communicate to her, she would think that was ridiculous. And if it's ridiculous if it came at her, that would mean it's equally ridiculous if she's the one doing it. So was there fighting? Absolutely. Was there anger? Absolutely. What if she was the one sitting in my office wanting a divorce because her and her husband are, quote, constantly fighting, and she's always angry at him? And so she wants a divorce. Well, to counsel her, I have to get behind the anger. That as a counseling pastor, I want to find, okay, so you're angry. Like, what sort of things are you angry about? And if she would tell me things that seemed rather trivial, where she sat and said, like, well, you know, I asked him to pick up some ground beef and he picked up 88% lean ground beef when everybody knows that I get 96% lean ground beef. And I asked him to pick up some milk and he got whole milk. Why is he getting whole milk? Doesn't he know how bad that is for you? He should have gotten low fat milk and he should know better. And listening to us, like, did you ask him to pick up 2% milk or did you just ask him to pick up milk? Did you ask him to pick up 96% lean beef or did you just ask him to pick up ground beef? He said, well, he should just know. Well, that would tell you, okay, so you have an internalized must or must not rule set that for whatever reason doesn't require you to communicate information, but it requires someone to just know information. And so that serves as an example of why we need to not divorce over emotion. Someone could be worried about something. Someone could be flat out afraid. Someone could feel overwhelmed by the totality of a situation. There's any number of feelings somebody could have that could be totally legitimate or could be, honestly, a little bit ridiculous. And then even if it's totally legitimate, the next question is like, okay, does the legitimacy rise to the level that this is the kind of thing you want to get divorced for? And so when I'm counseling people on this, what I'm trying to do with them is dig behind the emotion. Don't get divorced when you're angry. Don't get divorced when you're feeling emotionally hurt. Don't get divorced when the emotion is high based upon the emotions all being triggered. Get some distance. Now that means get temporarily separated so that you can get some emotional distance too, and give it some thought. Give it some thought, even with a counselor if you need to, but give it some thought. And figure out what are the underlying principles. What would you want it to look like? And how are you doing in it? One of the questions I asked the wife at one time, when she sat down in my office and she wanted my help getting a divorce. In that particular case, she wasn't seeking my help as a pastor, she was seeking my help as a lawyer. But because I also have my pastor and my counseling cap on it, and I said, well, as a lawyer, I can do that. But as a pastoral counselor, do you mind if I ask you a question, since I know you are a Christian woman? And, of course, she was open to it. I said, so before you divorce your husband for being a bad husband, for whatever the story is you have of being a bad husband, do you believe you're being a good wife? He said, well, that's only because, and it was because of him. So if he sat in my office and he said that, well, he's only being a bad husband because of you, that would be a reciprocal argument. So here's the way to look at that. If you divorce this man, and you might ever consider getting married again, if you offered your next potential husband the exact deal you're giving your husband right now, do you think you would get the quality of man that you would be interested in spending the rest of your life with if the deal you offer the new husband is the deal you are giving your current husband? Now, part of why this idea is important is that if you're giving a bad deal and you're getting a bad deal in return, honestly, that's fair because you're getting the reciprocal deal. And if you want a good deal, you need to offer a good deal. Now, this goes all the way back to pre-courting and dating, that if I want a high quality woman, and we'll take high quality woman as whatever is high quality to me, whatever suits my individual tastes and desires, because what I'm looking for in a woman might be different than what the next man's looking for in a woman, which would be different than the other man after that would be looking for in a woman. But say high quality in that she is what I might desire. Well, the next question is like, okay, so if the type of woman that I would be interested in is the type of woman who any number of men might be interested in, what would make me a good, a great, and maybe even the best choice for her? And too often I see people who know what they want, but they don't give a lot of thought, or they don't give much thought to, well, what do you offer? That if someone had a choice between, in my case, 10 different men, 20 different men, why would she choose me from a field of 10 or 20 men? What makes me uniquely suited to her? Now, note, not what makes me better in general as compared to other men, but uniquely suited to her. Because what's best for one person isn't going to be the exact same thing that's best for somebody else. And they're all package deals. All of us are a combination of pluses and minuses. Very often someone who makes a lot of money also works very long hours. And so if you want someone who spends a whole bunch of quality time with you and has a lot of money, that's a lot harder to come by. And so you get all these kind of trade-off examples. And so if I'm looking for a particular type of woman, what would make me uniquely suited to her? So likewise, then we flip to the other side, to what I would call post-courting. If I was to figure out, okay, what would I like my wife to do? What would I like my wife to grow toward? And then what would I, as a husband, ideally need to be so that the natural reciprocal of what I offer as a husband would be my wife behaving in the way that I would like her to behave? Basically, I call it be worthy of what you want. If I want a wife who is, say, more sexually interested in me, well, am I being romantic? Am I being loving? Am I being affectionate and caring? Am I creating that romantic atmosphere in which my wife might much more naturally feel a desire, might feel that connection, and that internal heart to heart and soul to soul kind of connection, where bearing her naked body and taking me inside of her feels so natural and almost magnetic, because I appreciate her naked soul and I connect so deeply with her heart, that our sexual relationship is just a reflection and a manifestation of our love relationship. Now, if I'm doing that and she's not responsive, well, then that's different. But if I'm not doing that and I just want her to be available to me anytime, unlimited quickies. Why? Because I'm the husband and I want to, and she should just do what I want. That might not be a deal that someone would sign on for. And so here's part of the question that I'll usually put to people. If you were at the proposal stage, and if you're emotionally distant enough from your spouse right now that you can't really think about them, just imagine if in the future you were in a relationship and the deal being offered was the deal you're giving right now. Would you say yes? Or do you think the person would have asked? And if that answer is no, one of the things to consider is whether or not you might want to at least put on the table upgrading the deal. Now, sometimes you dig behind and you find some fairly significant mismatches. Like one person could be very entrepreneurial, and entrepreneurial, as my friend Virginia Muskies teaches in her program. She talks about the revenue roller coaster. And entrepreneurs often suffer the revenue roller coaster. Some of those money's way up, some of those money's way down, and it's pretty inevitable. It's up, it's down, it's around, it does all these loop-de-loops. And she specifically works with businesses to try to get them off the revenue roller coaster, to try to get the revenue coming in more consistently. But the reason she has a business is because consistent revenue is often a problem for entrepreneurs. And so if I marry an entrepreneurial woman and we lean on her income, I have to be ready for the ups and the downs. Now, what if as we're going through this process, I realize, okay, I just really don't have the character, the value structure to deal with the financial insecurity. I just can't handle it. And we can't make it on just my income alone. Like, we need your income, and we need your income to be more consistent. Now, assuming I'm married to an entrepreneurial woman who's on the revenue roller coaster, one of the possibilities is she gets off of her entrepreneurial stint and she gets a regular job so that it fulfills my security needs. Another possibility is I just learn to live with it. And I just, we try to scale back so that my income's enough, and. Well, here gets to be part of the problem. What if that really is her temperament? What if I am making her sacrifice her vision, sacrifice where she's making a difference, sacrifice who she fundamentally is, this woman I fell in love with in the first place, and I'm making her walk away from all of that so I feel better? Well, that doesn't sound very fair. And I might like it, but over time, will I respect it? And then part of what I fell in love with was this entrepreneurial mindset. Might that affect my feelings toward her in the long term? Because now she's having to live a different life, and maybe, just maybe, it'll be soul crushing for her. But she would do it if I asked her to. And often when you have core responsibilities, and the fundamental core responsibility to me is children. We do that for our children because we have one chance to raise these kids. And we have to make sure we fulfill our minimum responsibilities to take care of these kids. And that is part of the choice we made when we had children. But when it's adult to adult, that's a different equation. And if I'm finding that I'm having difficulty dealing with what I signed on for, and so I want her to change, is that fair? And is that mismatch adequate for a for-cause divorce? And the answer is, I don't know. That's a judgment call. Would I approve it as a pastor? Honestly, I would. You might want to dig behind that a little bit. I might want to say, if I was my own parishioner, to figure out, where is this coming from? How bad is it? Do I want to change? Because if I think, I really need to be able to handle this more, and I'm willing to go into counseling, and I think it would be good for me, well, that might be worth exploring. I'm thinking, no, I am pretty fundamentally a solid kind of traditional thinker, get the job, get the benefits, build up the retirement. And that is very solidly who I am. And I really don't want to become the revenue roller coaster person. I don't want to ride the roller coaster. I don't want to be someone comfortable riding the roller coaster. I don't want to be the person who's excited about the roller coaster. I know my wife is, but that is not someone I have any interest in becoming. That compromises me. Then you have that judgment call. Well, if there are children involved, the fundamental responsibility governs. That's my view on that, because children are a fundamental responsibility. And so the question is, can you take better care of your children divorced than you can married? And most of the time, that answer is no. Sometimes that answer is yes. And so when you're exploring the idea of divorce, whether you're doing it as an individual or you're doing it as the counselor or as the coach, these are some of the explorations that I make. These are some of the things that I explore. These are some of the things I want someone to think about. Now, sometimes I've had people sitting in my office, and again, on this one, it's typically been the wife, which is like, I have been talking to him about this for years, and he never listens. Nothing ever changes. This is crazy. Like, we get into it and it explodes, and he's better for like 3 weeks. And then it just all goes back to the same. And this has been going on for years. Well, often here's what's going on the other side. So from his perspective, the way he sees it is everything's going along just fine, because he doesn't realize that, she's got this grating emptiness, longing, fear, pain, anger welling up inside of her. To him, everything's fine. And then every once in a while, she just gets completely nuts. And, sometimes he has this idea in his head that, because, women just get emotional sometimes, and that just happens sometimes. And she goes completely crazy, and she says all of these crazy things. And I walk on eggshells for a few weeks, and then like everything slowly gets back to normal and we're fine again. And just every 6 months or a year or so, we have one of these crazy, stupid explosions. And I'll just walk on eggshells for a few more weeks, and then everything's fine again. Well, that might be his perspective, but from her side, it's like, how intense does this have to get for him to get it through his thick skull? Well, it's because to him, he just thinks it's a momentary explosion, that she's being emotional over something. Stress is getting to her. She's burned out. She's, whatever he thinks is triggering all of it. And it might be as simple a thing as he just doesn't know. He just knows that every 6 to 12 months, she just like flies off the handle. And to him, it's for quote unquote, no apparent reason. Well, there is a reason, and it's everything she said. But on his side, everything that she's complaining about is normal marriage. So he doesn't see what the problem is. To him, it's fine. And to her, this is insane. Why are we putting up with this? How long does he expect me to live this way? Now, here's how bad it can get. There was a case where the wife had it. She yelled and she screamed and says, I can't live like this anymore. I'm done. I'm just done. And she packed her bags and she left, and she never came back. Well, he's talking about it later and said, I don't understand what happened. We were so happy. Now, think about that. He's going, we were so happy. No, you were so happy because you were getting what you wanted for you to feel settled and for you to feel happy and satisfied. Obviously, she wasn't, because if she was, your happy wife is fed up with being so darn happy that she left you. So part of listening to all of these things involves this process of clear escalation. Now, in martial arts, we call it just be polite. So it's be polite and firm, be polite with a warning, and then fulfill your warning. Because if it goes this crazy and walking on eggshells for a few weeks, settles down the crazy and he thinks everything's fine, then he thinks that's the pattern. Okay, just every once in a while, she's going to go off on all of these things. I walk on eggshells for a few weeks and then we're fine again for a while. And to him, he go, well, I can walk on eggshells for a few weeks at a time and then we're fine again. But if it's a solid principle-based conversation, instead of a flying off the handle, so it cannot be ascribed to, well, I don't know what's going on, or maybe she's under a lot of stress, maybe something else happened, I don't know what the story is, but she just got really super emotional. But be able to have solid principle-driven conversations of, look, this is what I want marriage to look like. This is what it actually looks like. And if we can't get it looking more like this vision I have in my head, that we can talk about and we can collaboratively create a joint vision, which is cleaving, so that you and I can build something that feels like and looks like and manifests like a marital relationship. Then we can stay married. But if it's not going to look like that, then I'm not interested in staying. Well, having a conversation more like that is more likely to make it clear that this is an emotion. No, I'm not just stressed. No, I'm not just upset. And heaven forbid, I'm not hormonal. This is a solid principle. And if we cannot resolve it, I will not be staying. And make it a good conversation. Make it a collaborative conversation. Create an opportunity to build a thing that both of you can like. Now, there's a fundamental mismatch. Then there's a fundamental mismatch. Make your judgment call. Do you stay in that or do you get out of that? I've known plenty of couples where the way they stay married is he has his life and she has her life, and their lives periodically intersect on practical things. They live in the same house. They pay their bills together. But as far as their day-to-day living, their social life, what's important to them, they live separately. And he goes off and does what he wants. She goes off and does what she wants. And they just stay married. And it's very much kind of a roommate situation. And for some couples, that's enough. For other couples, it's not. And sometimes it's enough for one, but it's not enough for the other. And that can be a fundamental mismatch. So a lot of these things are judgment calls, and I think they're judgment calls to be made by the people in it. Now, I suggest seeking counseling in the process of sorting that out, because you want to make sure you're really honestly digging behind the emotion. Because when we feel angry, we tend to have our mind subject to our emotions, and our mind seeks the justification for the anger, instead of truly seeking the principles that are governing this and truly seeking whether I need to make some changes to my rule set, such as the woman who flew off the handle over the ground beef realized for herself, or whether this really honestly is a fundamental difference. And I'm seeking a certain level of marital relationship, of personal fulfillment, and my partner is perfectly happy with the roommate thing. And to me, that's not marriage. Or I feel this deep abiding need for security, and I'm married to an entrepreneur who's on the revenue roller coaster. And so when I'm dealing with some of these kind of fundamental differences, there's a judgment call. Now, that judgment call, as I said before, is affected by fundamental responsibilities. If I have been the primary or the sole breadwinner for the household, then that means that I need to think about my responsibility for the spouse that has relied upon me for support. If both of us have roughly equal income or roughly equal income capability, that changes the responsibilities. But if we have minor children, that's a fundamental responsibility. And then the question is, can we take better care of our children apart than we can together? Now, of course, there's always dynamics. If there's abuse involved, if there's all, horror involved in any meaningful way, for safety's sake, you need to get apart. But for all of these things that are kind of the for cause, love, honor, cherish violations, a lot of these are judgment calls. And when we're dealing with divorce, what was the judgment call you made and what was it based on? And so when I'm ministering to divorced people, I'm very non-judgmental about all of it. I would just sort of presume that there was adequate cause. But here's the thing about when the cause is emotion. And studies have borne this out. It's kind of interesting that one of the common reasons people will get divorced, they say, is because of an adultery, because there was an affair. But the curious thing is they did a follow-up and they found that a couple of years after divorcing over an affair, the person who initiated that divorce started thinking it might have been a mistake. Because part of what really happens here is it wasn't the fundamental principle of the affair. It was that someone was so hurt and so angry that their rage drew them. They really got divorced over the emotion, not over the principle. And where the roughly 80% of the regret comes from is, say, if my wife has an affair on me, and I am enraged, and how could you, and, but then a couple of years distance, I've got some emotional distance, maybe I'm dating again, maybe I'm looking at another relationship, and I begin to realize, I'm not a really good partner. I'm beginning to learn that to get to second dates and third dates and to develop any kind of relationship, I need more skills. I need to be more respectful. I need to be more honoring. That I realized during the course of my dating life that the things I need to do to connect with a woman to maintain an ongoing relationship with no marital commitment requires sort of an elevated, better behaving Scott. And I start to realize, you know what? If I had dated my wife the same way I'm trying to date these women, if I had tried to bring my better self to her, like I'm finding I need to do to get these other relationships, maybe that wouldn't have happened. Maybe if I'd been more attentive, maybe if I'd been more loving, maybe if I'd been more romantic, maybe. And when you begin to realize, maybe that affair didn't just happen in a vacuum. Maybe I was a little too rash. Maybe I could have tried to be better. Maybe I could have tried to forgive. Maybe I could have tried to look at a bigger picture. Maybe, she was out of town and, she was drunk and, I didn't give any allowances for that. And maybe there was a chance we could have saved all of that. And I didn't give it a chance. And so when you have things like that, it's just a reminder, step away from the emotion. Look behind the emotion and look at the totality of the circumstances. Look at the fundamental principles involved and really think about what the for cause is. And then whether you're making the judgment call for yourself or whether you're in a pastoral or a counseling position and you're helping someone else sort their way through. Just give it some thought, dig behind. Look at fundamental responsibilities, but always look past the feelings to the principles and make the decisions based upon principles. And so we have the whole thing that we explored last time and the whole 12 lesson set on divorce with an 8 lesson set on the deal principle. And when we're building out some of these things, to keep in mind that emotion isn't the cause. There needs to be a principle level cause. And I am not a trial judge. I am not going to be holding a trial. It's a judgment call for the man and or the woman in the marriage. about whether they believe the for cause has been adequately explored. And if it has, and you've made that judgment call, I'm not going to sit in judgment over your judgment call. And that's just me as a pastor, as a coach, as a counselor, even as a lawyer, that I am going to be there for you. And Quest Xian will be a ministry for you. God bless.